Have you heard about this book that's been blowing up in France? It's claiming that modern science actually proves God's existence, and it's sparking debates all over. It's called God, Science, the Proofs. And get this, the subtitle is even more provocative: The Dawn of a Revolution. So what's all the fuss about? Is there some kind of new evidence that could flip one of the oldest debates in human history on its head? Well, let's dive into the arguments from this book and see what's going on. Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down, following the book's case step by step. First up, we'll look at the revolution in thinking it says is happening right now. Then, we'll dig into the evidence from physics, what the authors call the cosmic coincidences. After that, we'll shrink things down to the world of biology and explore life's impossible leap. And finally, we'll see how the book pulls all these threads together to make its final case.
So let's kick things off with the book's biggest, boldest claim, that there's a huge shift happening in how we think about science and faith. You know the old story, right? For centuries, it's been pretty straightforward. The more science we learned, the less room there was for belief. But the authors of this book are saying, hold on, that story is being completely turned on its head.
At the heart of their argument is this idea. For the past 100 years or so, the ruling philosophy in science has been materialism, basically the belief that the physical stuff you can touch and measure is all there is. But here's the kicker. The authors argue this view is crumbling, and it's not philosophers picking it apart. It's science itself that's delivering the blows. The book really frames the whole conversation around two competing visions. Think of it like two opposing teams. On one side, you have a universe that came from a creator. It had a beginning, it has an incredibly precise design, and it has a purpose. On the other side, you have a universe of just matter and energy, a cosmos that was always here, is fundamentally random, and has no designer behind it. The whole point of the book is to show that new discoveries are pushing the evidence hard toward that first team. So where does the evidence trail begin? Well, the authors start as big as you can possibly get, with the entire universe. They argue that if you look closely at the cosmos, you find these strange clues that just scream not an accident. They call them cosmic coincidences. Their argument from cosmology really stands on three main legs. First, the Big Bang Theory. It pretty clearly shows our universe isn't eternal, it had a definite starting point. Second, the laws of physics predict a thermal death, a definite endpoint. But it's this third one that's the real bombshell for their argument. The idea that between that beginning and end, the fundamental rules of the universe seem to be perfectly, and I mean perfectly, calibrated for life to even be possible. Now, this idea of fine-tuning has a name. It's called the anthropic principle. The best way to think about it is to imagine the universe as this massive control panel with all these dials and sliders for things like the strength of gravity, the charge of an electron, and so on. What scientists have discovered is that each of these dials is set to an incredibly specific value. If you were to nudge any one of them just a tiny, tiny bit, the whole show would be over. The universe as we know it, with stars and life, would just fizzle out. Let's make this real with one of the book's key examples, gravity. This number right here is the gravitational constant. It's basically the universal rulebook for how strongly objects pull on each other. And here's the thing that the book really latches onto. As far as we know, this number is totally arbitrary. There's no deep physical reason it has to be this exact value. It just is. And that leads to this incredibly powerful question the book poses. What if you just tweaked the 5th decimal place of that number? I mean, a change so small it's almost meaningless. Well, according to the physics models they cite, that tiny, tiny change would mean that stars either burn out in a flash or never even get hot enough to ignite in the first place. And just like that, poof, no stars, no planets, no carbon, no us. The book argues our very existence is balanced on a knife's edge of unexplained precision. And speaking of a beginning, check this out. This is a cornerstone of their whole argument. It's the cosmic microwave background, which is basically the universe's baby picture. It's the earliest light we can possibly see, a faint afterglow from the Big Bang itself. The book calls it the first light, a snapshot from a time when the entire universe was incredibly uniform and simple. You can imagine how mind-blowing this discovery was. In fact, when the Nobel Prize-winning physicist George Smoot first saw this detailed map of that ancient light, he famously said it was like seeing the face of God. And the book uses this quote to really drive home the point that this hard evidence for a beginning totally shattered the old scientific assumption that the universe was just eternal and unchanging. Okay, so after making this huge case based on the entire universe, the book does a complete 180. It zooms all the way in, from the scale of galaxies down to the microscopic world of biology. And here they say we find a totally different but just as powerful line of evidence for their case, something they call life's impossible leap. All right, so the book goes right after one of the most famous ideas about the origin of life, the primitive soup. They admit that, yeah, classic experiments were able to create some amino acids, the basic building bricks of life. But they argue that's like making a pile of bricks and expecting a skyscraper to just build itself. The experiments never came close to getting those simple bricks to self-assemble into even one complex working protein, let alone an entire living cell. And to really hammer this idea home, they bring in a quote from physicist Hubert P. Yockey. He said that believing all this complex machinery just popped into existence out of some random chemical soup is a matter of faith. So the book uses this to flip the script, basically saying, hold on a minute, who's really taking the bigger leap of faith here? So if life didn't just bubble up from a random soup, where did all its insane complexity come from? Well, the book calls it star witness to the stand. DNA. It argues that we've been looking at DNA all wrong. It's not just a complex chemical, it's pure information. It's a highly sophisticated, digitally coded software that's running the entire show and every living thing. It's not just goo, it's code. And to help you wrap your head around just how much information we're talking about, the book gives this absolutely stunning analogy. You could theoretically store the information content of 30 million volumes of the Encyclopedia Britannica in a single teaspoon of DNA. So the book just lays it out there. What does that sound like to you? Random chemical reactions or something that looks a lot more like technology? And they don't stop there. They bring in the heavy artillery, math. The book cites biologists who've actually calculated the odds of even a single useful protein forming by pure chance, and the chances are so ridiculously small they can only be described as astronomical. For the authors, this isn't just a long shot. It's a statistical impossibility, and it's another massive signpost pointing away from pure randomness. Okay, so we've seen the argument from the stars and the argument from the cell. How in the world did they tie this all together? Well, in this final section, the book lays all its cards on the table, weighs the evidence from both sides, and takes on all the major counterarguments. The book's bottom line is pretty blunt. They conclude that when you put the two big pieces of evidence together, the incredible fine-tuning of the entire universe and the staggering information content inside a single cell, the old-school materialistic idea that matter is all there is just can't hold up anymore. Now, you might be thinking, wait a minute, what about the multiverse or string theory? Well, the book tackles those head-on. It dismisses the multiverse as scientifically untestable, pure speculation. It labels string theory as unproven, and it pushes back hard on the idea that something like gravity could create a universe from nothing, because gravity itself is part of the universe. That's kind of like trying to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. And they don't pull any punches when it comes to these theories. They use a pretty sharp quote from philosopher Neil Manson, who called the multiverse hypothesis the last resort for desperate atheists. Their point is that these ideas aren't really driven by evidence, but by a philosophical need to find any possible explanation, no matter how wild, that avoids the possibility of a creator. And that brings us right back to where we started, to the book's central, provocative claim. After laying out all this evidence from the cosmos and from our own DNA, is it actually possible that we're seeing a genuine revolution unfold? A moment in history where science and faith, two old rivals, might actually be pointing in the exact same direction? That's the huge, controversial question this book leaves us with.